just putting us up live. This is coming. This is coming. So we don't have an echo. Great. Welcome to the Neuroccino on Monday morning. I'm very happy to see that we got, I think, 4 or 5 papers today even. You know the drill by now. Spread the word, bring more people, bring a paper, and come with a fair-minded but critical mind and discuss exciting science from last week with us. As I said, there will be a version of this available on YouTube later for everyone to catch up. In terms of the papers, if you can share the links in the chat so people can download it. And when you are presenting your paper, just share your screen so people can see it. And with that, I forgot who had a paper. Victor, how about you start us off today?
Oh, come on. It's not even a neuroscience paper, but it's a super exciting paper, I think.
So we need super exciting, sounds good.
All right, so let me check how I can get the screen shared. Here you go. Come on. All right, can you see it? Perfect. So this paper is about room temperature superconductivity. And this is something that is kind of a holy grail of material science and electronics and everything. Like it holds so many promises. Like superconductivity. Today we have, like for example, the MRI machine works only thanks to the superconductive magnets that they have inside. This is a state of matter where the electricity can flow through the material without any resistance, so it does not heat up. It goes very fast and everything, and also it produces a very strong magnetic field that have also some weird particularities. You can have like magnetic levitation above a superconducting magnet above a superconducting material. That's some great stuff that you can do with that. The problem is that nowadays superconducting material are not superconducting at room temperature. Usually you have to go to temperature of minus, I don't know, minus 200 Celsius, so a few Kelvin, to get the superconductive properties, which require like intensive cooling. For example, in the MRI machine, I think we use liquid helium. So that's not something that you can have like everywhere, and it's quite expensive to maintain. So yeah, there is a big search for superconductive materials at room temperature, and nowadays there have been some insights, some theoretical prediction that we could achieve it at least well at room temperature, but it would require super high pressure, and this is the case. This is an article that demonstrates that we can have superconductive material at 15 degrees Celsius. So it's a bit chilly, but it's a room temperature basically. But well, it's a mix of carbon, sulfur, and hydrogen. If I understand correctly, they are trying to replicate the structure of metallic hydrogen. That is a state of hydrogen that can be achieved at that theoretically can be achieved at about 400 gigapascal, which is higher than the pressure in the center of the Earth. So that's very high. But here they managed to create like a hydrogen-rich material that does not require to be that at that high of pressure, on only 267 gigapascal, which is still very, very high. but they are saying that with refinements and fine-tuning of the different composition and setup, they could probably get it lower. And maybe I'm not sure they talk about this, but maybe if they can make what we call a metastable material that could stay at room pressure too. Like metastable means just that you need a very some very hard pressure and temperature to get there. But then when you got the material, it can stay in this form for a very long time. So it's not really stable because it will decay back into its components, but it will stay. Just an example of this kind of material, diamond is a metastable material. At normal pressure, it should be graphite, but because it's metastable, it does not need the pressure that you need to create diamond to stay a diamond. So they hope that, well, there is a hope that we can find a metastable material that would be so superconducting at room temperature. And I think like it's a big step. This one at least is a proof that you can have like you don't need a super low temperature to have a superconducting material. It's not like a requirement. Here, like you still need an extreme environment, but maybe it's a big step to show that there is no one requirement that you need. You can have different variables that you can play with, and maybe one day we'll have something great to do with that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Victor. Are there any questions? Yep, Michel.
So, you get, you're an engineer and you have this understanding of science. In your vision, when do you think this technology will be available for us to use, in an MRI scan?
In an MRI scan. Well, since we already have superconductive magnets in MRI scans, there we might have something soonish, I guess, like maybe in the next 50 years. And yeah, since it's really, we can cool, nowadays we really can cool stuff low easily, but it's very hard to get something at very high pressure. Here they use diamond cells, like it's a setup that is it's a very tiny setup that on which you put very high pressure. It's not at all something that you can scale at the human size body, or human body size, I mean. But maybe it will lead to improvement. Like for now, we are using helium as a cooling agent, liquid helium, but maybe in the future with advances, we could use liquid nitrogen that is way less expensive. And that would be much better for MRI. So it's just, I think, with how the research are going right now, we could hope for something in a few decades that would lower drastically the cost of MRI. Yeah.
Hi, can I?
Hi, sure.
Linking to this, I share with you the YouTube link that the authors did about these papers. I also saw this paper in the news last week, and at the end of the video, they talk about MRI indeed.
Oh. Okay.
Do you want to see the video? It's 2 minutes if we want. What?
Sure.
How about you click on it, Victor, and share it with us, so we can watch it. If that's 2 minutes, we can take that.
Yeah, I'm trying to get, because I'm still sharing my screen, but how do I? Oh, I'm trying to find the.
I can do it otherwise. I share my screen and
Yeah.
I'll do it.
How do I? Oh, okay. No, it's okay. I found the
Okay.
the bar with everything. And
Because
where?
there's also in the papers,
Okay.
in the website, they talk about the time.
Where did you put? Okay, I got the YouTube video and I will share the screen on that.
Victor, you gotta share the sound with us.
It's not
on the
shared.
option. Yeah.
Damn it! Sorry.
We
How do
try
I?
to swear on this.
I think I'll let you do it because I have no idea how to do that right now. I didn't find the.
Michel, do you want to take over? Cool.
Thanks.
Mute and more. Do you hear something? Do you hear the video? Oh, that's annoying.
Michel, should you put up like your phones?
Oh, look what I can do. I can remove my headphones and you'll hear like this.
Superconductivity is a property that allows electricity to travel through a circuit without resistance. This means electricity can pass through a power cable without any losses and at higher speeds. One of the most unusual properties of superconducting materials is when they are cooled below the transition temperature, the magnetic field lines are expelled and have to pass around the superconducting material, making it possible to levitate these materials, something that used for virtually frictionless high-speed trains. While this technology has existed for more than a century, it needs extremely low temperatures, making it expensive and impractical for wide use until now. Here in my lab at University of Rochester, we have discovered the world's first superconductor that operates at room temperature. Using the diamond anvil cell to create the pressures similar to those found at the center of the Earth, we tested various hydrogen-rich compounds. The diamond anvil cell acts like a material search engine. We use it to test certain material at different pressures until we found the ideal condition to achieve superconductivity for each material, allowing us to determine which material were the most effective. This development is a part of a new class of dense hydrogen-rich material with remarkably high critical temperatures. One of those materials, carbonaceous sulfur hydride, worked at about 58 degrees Fahrenheit. The average loss of electricity in transmission and distribution, according to the US Energy Information Administration, is about 200 million megawatt per hour of electricity, and it cost our economy about $20 billion. The ability of these new superconducting materials to carry current without loss certainly increased the production, capacity, and efficiency of the power grid. It could also open up a world of possibilities for medical imaging such as MRI, computing, and consumer electronics like mobile devices. The next challenge will be to produce these materials that are stable or metastable without the use of high pressure achieved with the diamond anvil cell, making it even more economical to mass produce.
Nice. Nice. I'm gonna put my headphones back.
I have to say, I really like those new, this new trend of having a video with a paper. Just makes it a lot more tangible.
Mm-hmm. Since I'm sharing my screen, I'm gonna move on to my papers.
Sure, go ahead.
So this review came out last week or 2 weeks ago on ultrasound technology for imaging and modulating neural activity. So we all seen like this chart showing the pros and the cons of every neuroimaging approach. There is a very good in temporal resolution, but quite moderate or not good at all in terms of spatial resolution, which is the localization of what you're looking at. It's also very good, well, they're relatively good in terms of spatial resolution, but they have a very bad temporal resolution. So for the good temporal resolution, you have electrophysiological methods, EEG, MEG, single cell recording, all these kind of approaches. And for the spatial resolution, usually you have PET and MRI. Here you have like a review of a new method that, well, it's an old method actually, but it's been expanded to the brain quite recently, which is ultrasound imaging, which has the advantage, as the text that I highlighted here indicate, that it can give you a spatial resolution of 100 microns and a temporal precision of about 1 millisecond. And you know, it's clearly way better than what we had before. And you might have heard of this method because you can do imaging, and I'll come to that point with it, but you can also destroy selectively single parts of the brain. It's been used in the US, and we have a center in France, or a couple of centers in France, and there is also one, I think, in Switzerland. It's fuse, like the fuse approach, where they heat up, thanks to ultrasound, a part of the brain that is a tumor. And because a slight heat will change the biology of the cell is going to self-destruct. That's pretty much what it is. So you can do surgery in the brain without opening the brain using these approaches. So it's very promising, but you can do so much more with this. And you have in this table here a summary of all the methods that you can, all the measurement that you can derive from ultrasound imaging and what you can do with it. And essentially, and you have like the description here, in A, you can use a ping and kind of look at like the acoustic scatterings through the echo inside the biological organism you're measuring. Typically, we're interested about the brain. And so here, the ultrasound imaging involves the emission of brief pulses and sound and recording and of backscattered echoes from materials such as molecular reporter and blood cells. In some, you can do an image or structural images from this approach. Then you can also play with the push. So you're going to use a way of distributing the sound to actually create a mechanic on different part of the brain. And this mechanic on different part of the brain can activate brain areas. You can also increase the heat of some part of the brain, which will also activate them according to the biology of this different part of the brain, or destroy them. That's a fuse approach. And you can use specific sounds to open the blood-brain barrier, which might have like some medical interest. And then you have the transduce part, which is really for the future. You can directly communicate wirelessly with inorganic material. So if you put a microchip inside the brain, you'll be able with the sound to transmit information to this microchip and change its functioning. Typically interesting for disease like Parkinson, where you put electrodes and people still have to have the electrodes that come out of the brain. Here you could have it like directly in the core of the brain and communicate with it wirelessly, which definitely will increase the quality of life. In terms of functional neuroimaging, this is slides that you can see here on the right. It's been done in mice, in rat, in rabbit. I think this is a skunk. Right next to it, you have a pigeon, and you have a monkey right here. We're doing a bit of monkey ourselves, and they started doing it in humans. And so you cannot have, for the functional imaging, yet a full coverage of the human brain, but you can have like a full slice of the brain. So if you know where you want to do your measurement and understand a little bit the dynamic and the spatial resolution at very high resolutions there, you can. And you really see the columns because the resolution of your functional neuroimaging will be at 100 micron with an effect size for tasks, which is around 0.5 for a single trial, which is way above what we can do with fMRI. Blah, blah, blah. So they describe a little bit over here. There is a discussion in this review, as you can see, it's in progress, about how you could use ultrasound to quantify, like in PET, typical molecules in the brain. You know, for example, if you want to see noradrenaline inside the brain, you'll have a special pulse that will be able to detect it in the brain, but it's still in progress because, of course, this is top-notch physics of sound. I forgot to mention why, you know, like the big difference with any other methods here is that the use of sound, like sound is not blocked by the skull. And that's the main reason this method is so amazing. It will not be distorted or stop sound wave by the skull, which is not the case when you use magnetoencephalography, which is also a limitation when you want to do direct electrical recording, or when you use EEG, or even when you want to use optical imaging. You still have a problem with the skull. Here, it's not an issue at all. So that's a neuromodulation. Oh yeah, and they also have some perspective onto sonogenetic. So we're using spatial exposition to sound. You can modulate the expression of selected genes, but that's also something that is in development. But we should see that in our lifetime, I think. And as I mentioned, there is this interaction between ultrasound and inorganic material, which is literally science fiction to me. But this is where, you know, this is where good ideas begin. At least that's my point of view. And I wanted to couple that with another recent paper. I won't go through all of it. But it's called full waveform invasion imaging of the human brain, whereby the authors use this kind of science fiction tool. It's a helmet, you know, that you put on the head of your participant, and it's connected with a wire. You do like 1 second acquisition, and then you can. Of course, it was not a real person. It was like a phantom brain. You can do from this phantom brain that you see on the top with a stroke here, with a 1 second acquisition, you can reconstruct the image that is here at the bottom. This is absolutely fascinating for future application in medicine. The only problem that they currently have is it takes 1 second to acquire the signal, but it takes about 2 weeks to reconstruct the image because they use advanced machine learning approaches. But this is really something we can, you know, this is a problem that we can solve. Is that's just like the computing, you know, with the technological development, this is something that will progressively improve. And so with that, you know, I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Michel. That's super exciting. So between those two methods, they basically solve our temporal and spatial resolution issues in the clinic, which is fantastic. I may have missed it, but what's the from the first paper? What was the limitation where you can't do a full brain coverage yet? Is that just?
Oh no. So the limit from the first paper, they describe what have been done with ultrasound imaging, where people just use like a couple of emitters and captors. And here, really, like the development of the paper, so they built this helmet with a lot of emitters and the algorithm behind it to reconstruct the image. So that's how they're complementary. The first one is a review of the past. This is like future perspective and technologies using this method.
That's impressive. Are there any other questions?
Can I ask?
Mm-hmm.
In the ultrasound, I don't know about how it works, but you can measure like, or you can have an image like an echo image, or you can also like measure velocity through echo Doppler. I was thinking like similarly to the heart imaging. I don't know.
This is exactly it. So for those of you who have a kid, when they do the ultrasound of your baby in the belly of your partner, you can actually see the blood flow, and they have a way to show the blood flow. But this is the same idea here, but applied to the brain with a lot more fancy emitters and captors and better algorithms. But that's that's just the expansion of these methods to the brain.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no other questions, Leah, you had a paper as well for us. If you can share your screen.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, you have to open it. Preferences. I'm sorry, I can't show.
While Leah is trying to share her screen, let me just update you on new developments from the CNS seminars. We launched the CNS Academy that is now available from the YouTube channel. And what you have in there is about 20 hours of teaching from Professor Thiebaut de Schotten on cognitive neuroscience, plus several of our presentations and other lectures that we're giving outside of that module. So if you go on the YouTube channel, there's now a section called CNS Academy, and you can learn all about white matter anatomy and cognitive neurosciences. Also feel welcome to pop your questions in the comment box there, and we try to pick them up and answer them to the best of our knowledge. Now with that, it seems like Leah managed to share her screen, so I hand over to you.
So this paper published on the 17th of October is about Alzheimer's disease, and in particular linguistic markers. Actually, there is not a MRI physician, so is also in the discussion is a little bit provocative that you can predict how a normal person can develop Alzheimer in their later age through only automatic like predictive supervector machine, so machine learning, and linguistic biomarkers. So in particular, this is a big population. Is called the the Framingham heart study is the prospective study where they evaluated normal people which are not affected by any kind of dementia, and they follow them in follow-up. Every 5 years, they have a mini mental examination. Every 5-6 years, they have neuropsychological batteries, and also this simple linguistic test called cookie felt picture description task from the Boston Aphasia Diagnostic Examination, where the subject is asked to written what they see in this picture. So you can have like a complete description of the image where the young boy is reaching for the cookie jar. What about the sister? Is the sister or the mother? And the water is falling apart. So you can describe this picture with a lot of details and also with a complex grammatical structure. Or you can describe this picture like without auxiliary verbs, without articles or punctuation, and so more like a telegraphic speech, the boy taking cookies, mother washing dishes. Or also in a more impaired description, you can have misspellings, missing subjects, so only the verbs, some error like jar instead of jar. And so this was the simple task administrated. About the population, there were 1,254 participants. They underwent longitudinal examinations. So you have, of course, more samples, and the cohort was divided in 2 groups. One 486, where a panel of experts review the examination of the participants and say if their condition was impaired or not. So if they were labeled as the cases, so who have deficits and MCA or Alzheimer's disease, and controls, where the ones who didn't present any impairments. And in this way, they have like a ground truth, so something that they can label as a D or not a D. And otherwise, in the other group, they did not, there is not a review of all the cases, and they only have, they call the weak labels, so something like features that describes the dementia rate, but they didn't have the ground truth. So they did several machine learning approaches, Bayesian, logistic regression, super vector machine, these 3, to test the first group with a cross-validation approach, so where you divide in many folds, here 20-fold, the subject group, and you try to predict. So in machine learning, you have a test set and validation test set, and you use the validation set to assess the accuracy of the prediction. Otherwise, you can they use all these weak labels as a training set, and then they validated with the with these other participants in the ground, which have ground truth labels, and it's called old out the test. I try to make this simple because they have like 40 pages of supplementary materials. So it's a really detailed analysis, but to give a general idea. And in particular, where they created their data set, they used this threshold about 85 years old, and subjects were considered like controls, so normal, if they did not present AD before this threshold. after this threshold. So if you have impairments in your performance after 85 years old, you are a normal, labeled as normal. If you present deficits before this threshold, you are labeled as impaired, so early at the diagnosis. And so they have clinical evaluations, also evaluating like if they have heart diseases or other comorbidity. Demographics, they underwent, they divided their data sets in people who had underwent college and people they did not, neuropsychological evaluation and linguistic evaluation. And in the paper, they compared how much the linguistic test can add to the prediction of all these variables. And they found that using linguistic markers, you can have an area under the curve of 0.74. And instead, if you don't use the linguistic markers, you only have 0.79. So use this combination with the linguistic variables, you can increase of a 10 point in the accuracy of the prediction. And in particular, the variables who were like the most important in this model were the telegraphic speech, repetitiveness, and misspelling. So when you have these deficits, when you present these deficits, like in early, so before the future at the onset, you are more likely to develop AD. And indeed, they also made a longitudinal analysis using a non-negative matrix factorization that it works like similar to a principal component analysis to give a general idea. Indeed, here you have the weights of the first component and the years before the onset, that is labeled as 0. And after the onset. So you can see that before the onset, in the preclinical at this stage, you have an impairment of the linguistic evaluation. So if you have these markers here in the preclinical stage, you can predict if these patients will develop AD. And so this is in the view of early intervention to AD. And yes, in the discussion, they also talk about the education, because splitting the groups in people who underwent college and people who were not, where was that? You have like a difference in the two groups. And of course, and they also said that female are more affected by this, by the development, but the educational level really helped in this way. This is in the view of the cognitive reserve. And one limitation of this study is that the evaluation was only done evaluating the written description of the picture. Instead, by a spoken version, you can have like more details about the speech. And yeah, they were also in the final, in the conclusion of the paper, they were saying that this can really help the follow-up of these subjects. And yes, and they compared also with MRI scans and other biomarkers for AD. So,
thank you, Leah. That's a very interesting study. Personally, I'm not entirely surprised that language is a good marker. I see there's one question from Michel. Go ahead.
okay.
Hi, Leah. Great job. So I get a technical question and more a cognitive question. Like on the cognitive part, the fact that the cookie theft description is such a success. Do you think it's because it's a more ecological measurement of the function of the human brain than typical language assessment that will be a more directed and not really applicable to everyday life? And that's why it's more sensitive.
Yes, in the study, they say that yes, the administration of this test was really simple. And also you don't have like, it's also like objective because you don't have an interaction. So when you ask questions and you have to like record all the sentences, like in my experience, I evaluated like some results for language test with the Western aphasia battery, the Boston naming test. You have these really long set of variables, and sometimes yes, it's difficult also to put that together. In this way, the task is simple. Of course, later in the evaluation, in the supplementary materials, they really evaluate a lot of details of this test. And yes, it's so it's a usual examination, and yes, it seems that you can pick the complexity of the speech by this simple description. And yes, I don't know if I answered because I'm not like here you have like a really detailed of everything, the semantic content, the agraphia, and yeah, there is syntax complexity. It seems that really language is something that is targeted by neurodegeneration that we know, like also primary progressive aphasia, and it seems like yes, a sensible I don't know if I can say biomarker, but yes, neuropsychological evaluation test.
Just to follow up as well. So there's obviously many different ways of how you can assess language in a clinical population. And the advantage of a picture description task is that it's a spontaneous language assessment. So it's not very structured, and you get quite a nice overall picture of the language abilities of a patient. Whereas if you have a more structured test, and there's many of them available out there, you tap into very specific linguistic patterns. So that's why this might be quite sensitive, because it's an overall spontaneous speech assessment.
Yes, this was a better answer.
I just have a question. Is it because in this test they ask to write down if I have well understand the task? It was not an oral description as we assessed in clinical assessment, no? In
yes,
the clinical,
yes.
So do you think it can change something in the linguistic evaluation? Because maybe we cannot see the same things in your response in writing, if you ask a participant to write, or if you ask them to respond with verbal condition. Sorry, I'm not sure if I I don't know.
So sorry, are you saying that
Yes.
with like a spoken version, you can have more details about the description?
Yes, if the description is verbal or is with if you ask people to write, or if you ask people to respond with the voice verbally, do you think it's different? Because I don't think we ask a participant to respond by writing in the clinical settings at the cooking? No?
Yes, indeed, the ones that you were talking is one of the major limitation of this study that they discussed here. And they say that the spoken version can reveal more like different aspects of linguistic dysfunctions. So this is like the simplest scenario, I think, that you can have with these tests. So also to evaluate like this big cohort of patients. But yes, in the spoken version, I think that you can have also the ratings, like the frequency of the words, and you can have more details, and also the examiner can, I think, like give some scores about the spoken version. Yes, yes,
and
so
maybe
it's one of the limitations.
Yes. And maybe it will be helpful to assess a spontaneous speech in the future, to have more variables and to extract more features of language and linguistic in a task with more ecological value, I think.
Yes.
I can give you an example from my previous work where we also used a picture description task, and we administered it both verbally and written. And you always get a much richer response in the verbal version. Partially, I'm assuming, because it's quite effortful to write it down, and those pictures are very complex, which is the very nature of the task, right? Because you want to get the complexity of the picture explained back to you. But obviously writing all of that down is quite tiresome. So a lot of people take shortcuts when they're writing, but when they describe it verbally, you actually get a much richer linguistic picture. So yes, I fully agree. Michel?
And so I see that they really were interested into the language-related performance of and writing performance of this picture, but this is a picture that is also used a lot for visuospatial impairment, such as simultagnosia. Did they try to capture the like if people were able to describe the interaction between the different elements of the picture? Typically, like the kids are trying to rob a cookie while their mom is cleaning the dishes, so she cannot see. Because some, with some brain impairment, people just keep like their attention very focal onto a single event, but never capture the interaction between these events.
They didn't talk directly about this aspect. I was like going through the supplementary materials to see if there was something, but no, these were the like the different linguistic variables. So verbosity, lexical richness, repetitiveness, agraphia, semantic content, idea, and propositional density. Maybe this one, because if I will quantify. But no, about visuospatial, like perspective, no, the word frequency, language modeling, it was more on the semantics, so in the interaction of the different, like the son, the daughter, so they did not talk about visuospatial impairment, if this was.
Is that you having another question? He's on a roll today. Go for it.
I'm sorry, this is my last question. I found it like very interesting. You may know there are like many different ways to assess a prediction in statistics. So I got distracted because I just presented my papers, and it's always hard to focus on the next one. But did they do a prediction that was out of sample, or did they just use a sample to calculate the prediction? Did they use another data set to check that it works?
Yes, yes. They structure the study in this way. So they have two groups. One group is used for a cross-validation. So in the same group, you have the training set and the validation set that you inverted each time. This is the 20-fold. So the data set is divided in 20 subject validation. And each time you use the fold as a training, as a validation set, and you use the others as a training set. And also they did that like with the participants that were not in the validation set at all, but they were all in the training set. And then they used this data set to predict the validation set from this group that for which a panel of experts like review the cases and give them a label that they consider as the ground truth. So what you use to compare what your model predicts, you compare this with what the experts said, and by this comparison, you have the accuracy of your model. And they did that in 3 different ways. Using a Bayesian model, super vector machine, and logistic regression. So you have all the weights of these variables, and yes, so to answer to the question, in this second scenario, the training set was divided by the validation set, but they also evaluated the accuracy in the validation set with a cross-validation approach.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions or papers? No. It's funny, even on Zoom, people do the thing they usually do in class where you just look away casually. Okay, if there is no other paper for this week, thank you very much for joining us on Zoom, and also for those over on the YouTube channel. And we see you next Monday. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.